If someone came to you with the easiest job ever and offered you a bunch of money to do it, I feel like you'd do it, right? I mean, most people would. Well, that's how our first story today starts, and in hindsight, there were a lot of red flags that could have been caught. Anyways, today in Minecraft started out as a chill day and ended up not being that. You'll see. So yeah, let's go ahead and get into the first story. It's from r/scary stories from user nocardiologist1353. My university paid me $2,000 to stay silent for one night. My university is performing strange overnight studies. I first learned about them during my second semester, when I was down to less than $40 in my checking account. The flyer was pinned to a bulletin board outside the psychology building. Overnight silent study. Compensation $2,000. Duration 1 night. Requirements: must remain awake, must remain silent, must follow all instructions provided by research staff. If interested, please go to Sci 213 Studies and Tests on the second floor of the psych building. I must have read it 10 times. $2,000 for one night was ridiculous. It was more money than I made in a month working part-time at the campus bookstore. At the bottom of the flyer was a handwritten note. Participants who leave early will not be compensated. For some reason, that line bothered me more than anything else. Not because I would leave earlier, but because whoever added that in felt like people would want to leave. My empty wallet is what finally made up my mind. Taking the flyer in my hand, I entered the building and headed to the second floor. On the other side of the door, marked Sci 213, was a small waiting room with a handful of chairs, and at the far side of the room was a hallway guarded by a small desk. Sitting behind the desk was a young woman, not much older than me. As I entered, she looked up and smiled. "Hello," she said pleasantly. "Can I help you?" Yes, I said as I walked up to the desk. I was actually wondering if there's still time to sign up for this. I slid the flyer across the desk to her. As she saw it, her smile lowered slightly, and she quickly glanced up at me before her eyes returned to the paper and her smile again widened. "The silent study? Yes, there are still slots available. Would you like to sign up?" A burst of excitement ran throughout my body. Yes, I'd love to. $2,000 is too good to pass up. She forced a laugh before asking for my information. She took down my name, phone number, emergency contact, and medical history. After she had everything she needed, she said, "All right, I think I have everything. You'll need to be at the Garner building by 9 p.m. this coming Tuesday. The study will take place in vacant dorms at the top level. You're welcome to bring with you any books or homework you want, but please don't bring anything that can play songs or movies. Since this is a silent study, those aren't allowed." I nodded quickly. Garner building at 9 p.m. on Tuesday. Got it. As I turned to leave, she said, "Oh, one more thing. I nearly forgot." I turned back around. She slid a packet across the desk. "Please read and sign the consent forms." The packet was nearly an inch thick. I didn't bother to read it all, just signed the last one. As I left, the secretary called after me. "Good luck." Tuesday came quickly. I spent the day sleeping and putting together a backpack full of snacks and books for the night ahead of me. By 8:50 p.m., I was standing in front of the Garner building. A few moments later, a balding man in his 40s came out and asked, "Are you here for the study?" I swallowed hard before nodding. "Yes, sir." "Great, please follow me." He led me inside and into the building's elevator. Hitting the button for floor 5, we headed to the top. The elevator opened to a hallway dimly illuminated by fluorescent yellow lights. The hallway was nearly identical to the other dorm halls on campus, only this one was strangely lifeless. It felt as though no one had used this floor in years. The man led me further down the hall before stopping in front of room 504. "Here's where you'll be staying tonight. Just so you know, we have installed security cameras everywhere except in the bathroom, just so we can confirm that you remain silent all night. We've also installed an intercom system." I looked at him confused. "What's that for?" He responded, "At the beginning of every hour, we'll announce the time for you. If everything goes well, this will be the only voice you hear all night." The answer wasn't particularly reassuring, but $2,000 had a way of making concerns feel smaller. I turned the doorknob and I walked in. The man said, Remember, you are free to leave at any time, but just know that those who leave early will not be compensated." With that, he reached in and closed the door. I heard the quiet click of the door locking and realized that the study started now. I turned to face the room, finding it to be not much different from my own dorm room. It was quietly lit by a single overhead light and a small lamp that stood on the desk in the corner. The floor was carpeted and a lofted bed took up one full wall. Beneath it was a small reading chair and a mini fridge. Across from the bed was a full-size wardrobe and a poster of a cat hanging on a branch with the phrase, "Hang in there." The outside wall was home to a large window that granted a view of the courtyard. Unlike my dorm, this one had a short hallway shooting off to the right of the door. Here was a tiny kitchenette with a few cabinets and a sink. There was a miniature coat closet. At the end of the hall was a door to a small bathroom with a toilet, sink, and tight shower. Instinctively, I opened my mouth to comment on the room before remembering I wasn't supposed to speak again until morning. Taking the backpack off my back, I pulled out one of the books and took a seat in the chair. The first hour was boring. I didn't leave the chair, nor did I put down the book. I jumped an hour later when a loud monotone voice broke through the silence. "It is now 10 p.m. I released a breath I hadn't realized I was holding, rebuked myself in my head for so quickly forgetting about the intercom before returning to my book. At 10:30, I needed a break from reading. The words on the page were starting to hurt my eyes. Standing up, I stretched and began to absent-mindedly examine the dorm. I opened all the cabinets in the kitchenette, but only found a few cups and bowls. I stared out the window, watching my fellow students come and go. Then I went to the bathroom and opened the closet, which was empty except for a single winter jacket. Finally, I opened the wardrobe, and as I did, a crumbled piece of paper fell to the ground. Seeing that something was written on it, I picked it up, and here's what it said. "If you found this, read it before midnight. The researchers won't tell you everything. Stay silent. Not, don't talk. Stay silent. The researchers are studying what happens when nobody speaks. Do not interfere with the observation. If another participant enters the room, do not acknowledge them. Participants are assigned one room each. If the intercom asks you a question, the study is ended. Leave immediately. The hourly announcements should only happen on the hour. If the intercom speaks at any other time, cover your ears and do not listen to what it says. Do not look into the hallway between 1:13 a.m. and 1:20 a.m. If someone knocks 3 times, ignore it. But if someone knocks 4 times, move away from the door immediately. If you hear crying from the bathroom, do not investigate. If the lights go out, close your eyes and count to 100. If you see someone standing in the courtyard staring at your window, close the blinds and do not open them for 2.5 hours. At some point during the night, you will hear your own voice. It'll ask you a question. Do not answer. If the intercom announces it is now 3:07 a.m., hide in the coat closet until another announcement is made. Whatever happens, do not open the wardrobe a second time. I couldn't help but roll my eyes after reading it. Clearly, someone who did the study before me had gotten bored and wanted to prank the next participant. I crumbled the paper and tossed it into the trash can. After filling a glass of water and grabbing a snack, I returned to the chair and my book. I glanced up from my book at 11 when the intercom announced. It is now 11 p.m. I scanned the room slowly. After 2 hours of silence, I felt like the room itself had grown louder. Every squeak and groan of the building felt far louder than it should be. After glancing around the room a few times, I returned to my book. Around 11:40, I started feeling drowsy, so I stood up and did some jumping jacks and ran in place for a while to get the blood flowing. I was on the toilet when the clock struck midnight. The intercom declared, "It is now 12 a.m. I finished in the bathroom and returned to my book. I nearly jumped out of my skin when 20 minutes later, at 12:20 a.m., the intercom said, "Participant 3 is now reading a book." I lowered my book and looked around quickly. That was weird. I thought it was only for telling the time. Am I participant 3? I sat frozen for a few minutes, waiting to hear anything else. I noticed a low hum that hadn't been there before, but after waiting for 10 minutes, I stood up and grabbed a snack from my bag. As I did, the intercom said, "Participant 3 is eating." I froze mid-chew and looked up at the little camera in the corner, staring down at me. Why would they announce my actions like this? The hum grew louder as I returned to my chair. At 12:39, the intercom spoke again. Participant 3 is breaking the rules. I looked around in confusion. What rule had I broken? I hadn't said anything. The hum was now so loud that it was hurting my ears. 5 minutes later, at 12:44, the intercom announced, Participant 3 is going to die. Panic filled my mind as the hum grew painfully loud. It felt like my brain was going to explode. But in that moment, I remembered the note I had thrown away, and Rule 4. I squeezed my hands over my ears. Even with them covered, I could feel vibrations radiating through my hands. But after a few moments, it stopped. Cautiously, I removed my hands from my ears, and everything was perfectly quiet again. The hum was gone, as if it had never been there. Sweat formed on my forehead as I moved to the trash can and unwrinkled the balled-up paper. I stared at the rules for several minutes, but then I heard the jiggle of keys and the sound of someone fumbling with a lock, before I turned and saw the front door swing wide open. At the door stood a man who looked roughly my age. He had shaggy blonde hair, wore shorts and sandals, and a sweatshirt bearing the school's logo. There was a bag at his feet. He looked at me and smiled. "Hey man," he said. "Guess we're going to be roommates. What's your name? I'm Chris." I was too confused to answer, but he kept going. "What's your major? Mine's business. Are you as pumped as I am to be here?" I was about to answer, but the rules in my hand caught my eye. Rule number 2. If another participant enters your room, do not acknowledge them. Participants are assigned one room each. I felt cold as I read it. "What you got there?" the man asks as he noticed the sheet in my hand. I lowered my eyes to the floor and didn't respond. He went quiet as he walked closer to me. He stood mere inches from me. "Is that orientation information?" he said as he pointed at the paper. "Why don't you give that to me?" he asked smoothly. I instinctively pulled my hand away, but as I did, he screamed, "Give it to me." My hand shook as I folded the paper and put it in my pocket. He grunted and said, "Look at me." His voice had changed, growing deeper and cracked. "Look at me." I swallowed as I closed my eyes. I could feel his hot breath on my face. It smelled rotten. I stood there with my eyes closed for what felt like hours. But when I opened them again, he was gone. The door was shut and locked. It was 12:57 a.m. I was a wreck. The rules in my pocket must be real. I wanted to leave. I wanted to get out of there and never come back. But after what I had experienced, I seriously doubted that I could truly leave. It felt safer to listen to the rules and make it through the night. After taking a few minutes to calm my nerves, I pulled out the rules and reviewed them. Rule number 5. Do not look into the hallway between 1:13 a.m. and 1:20 a.m. It was 1:05 a.m. I looked at the little hallway leading to the bathroom, wondering what could possibly happen there in 8 minutes. Whatever it was, I wouldn't be looking. The chair faced toward the door, and I could see the hallway from where I sat. So I turned the chair to face the window. As I did, I glanced out the window. There in the courtyard was a tall figure, holding a single lit candle in its hand as it stared directly into the window. I couldn't tell how far away it was. I only knew it hadn't been there a moment ago. Without hesitation, I shut the curtains and set a timer for 2.5 hours. As I did, I felt the room become noticeably colder. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I heard the sound of dishes moving, coming from the hallway. I didn't dare to even turn around. I couldn't risk seeing what was in the hallway. It sounded like someone was trying to cook a meal. I heard the sound of vegetables being chopped and a pot of water being boiled, even though the kitchenette I saw didn't have a stove. Every now and then, I heard someone trying to whistle a tune, but it was monotone and lacked any sense of music. At around the 6-minute mark, I heard a quiet, dry voice say to itself, need to get some rosemary. Then I heard heavy footsteps leave the hallway. They crossed the carpet slowly, one step, then another, then silence, complete silence. I could no longer tell where it was. I was about to turn around when, directly in my right ear, I heard a mocking whisper. "You're still here, huh?" After that, I heard footsteps walk away and the sound of the door slamming. Slowly, I turned around. It was 1:21 a.m. Everything was pretty quiet for a while. At 2:30, loud wailing came from the bathroom and lasted about 20 minutes. After it stopped, I cracked the bathroom door open. It was empty. Sometime after 3:20, I was getting pretty tired. The silence was making my eyes heavy, and right as I started nodding off, the lights went out. The darkness pumped adrenaline through my veins, waking me up. From the bathroom, I could hear a clicking sound. It sounded like a dog with long nails walking across a hardwood floor. It was getting closer. Remembering the rule, I squeezed my eyes shut and began counting to myself. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The sound was now right in front of me. 10, 11, 12, 13. The sound stopped, and directly in front of me, I heard creaking bones. 20, 21, 22, 23. A cold, bony hand gently caressed the side of my face. I squeezed my eyes tighter. 30, 31, 32, 33. A raspy voice vibrated off of long dead vocal cords. Just open your eyes. My throat went dry as I continued counting in my head. 45, 46, 47, 48. A damp, rough tongue licked the side of my face. 67, 68, 69, 70. Right as I hit 100, the lights flipped back on. Even through my closed eyes, the sudden brightness was a shock. I opened to see the empty room just the way I left it, though my cheek was still slightly wet. For the next 2 hours, I hid in the bathroom. I figured that since the only rule involving the bathroom had already happened, it was probably the safest place. I sat on the toilet lid waiting, hoping time would move faster. Near 5:15 a.m., I heard a quiet voice behind me. You sure have been quiet for a long time. It was my voice, not in my head, but in my ears. It was my exact voice, like I was listening to it on a recording. I tried to ignore it. Why did you stop talking to Mom before she died? I clenched my teeth. How did it know about Mom? It asked again. Why did you stop talking to Mom before she died? And again, from 5:15 till the sun rose, it asked the same question over and over again. I couldn't take it. I was near my breaking point when the sun peeked over the horizon. As it did, the voice stopped. Everything was quiet once more. Between sunrise at 7:30 and 8:30, nothing happened. I braced myself for the worst, for something terrible to jump out of the wardrobe, but nothing did. At exactly 9 a.m., the intercom announced, "It is now 9 a.m. The study is complete. Do you have any questions?" I immediately rose from the chair, grabbed my bag, and headed out the now unlocked door. By the elevator stood the same man from last night. He smiled and said, "Congratulations on remaining silent the whole night. Your time has been very beneficial to our study." He handed me a check for $2,000 and what looked like a business card. "Here's your pay, and if you'd like to participate in any of our future studies, please call the number." I stared at him in silence. "Please follow me," he said, ushering me into the elevator. I decided to go home to my dad's for a while. I'm even thinking of transferring schools. I just can't be there right now. I'm writing this late at night while I'm lying in bed. I haven't spoken much since this all happened. I'm scared something will hear me. My clock just hit 3:07, and as it did, a cold mechanical voice just filled the room. It is now 3:07 a.m. Alright guys, No Cardiologist 1353 is like top 5, for sure, of the scary stories and no sleep stories we've read on the channel. I swear, it's so good. I guess my questions for you guys are, 1, would you try to leave? Because I feel like at this point where they say, oh yeah, if you try to leave, the test is over, or the study's over, I feel like the study's over because you're cooked. Like, you're gonna die if you try to leave. My other question is, would you guys go back for another study if you survived this? Because I feel like $2,000 for one night, yeah, I mean, that's a lot of money, but it needs to be like $2,000 plus the money to cover your therapy bills, because you're going to need it after this. Anyways, shout out to No Cardiologist 1353. Let's go ahead and get on with the next story. It's from r/scary stories from user trash_Tia. My sister and her roommates have a very unsettling relationship with their houseplants. What? A few days ago, my older sister, 28, stopped returning my texts and calls. As the youngest sibling at 25, I felt weirdly responsible, so I decided to check on her. Rosie has always been stubborn, so ghosting me instead of explaining what's going on was pretty in character for her. Still, nearly a week had gone by without a word from her. Not even a mediocre TikTok, which screamed millennial. I hadn't had a chance to visit her new place yet. Life got in the way, and I was struggling with some pretty intense depressive episodes when she had her housewarming party. Mom spent 3 hours freaking out over her gift to Rosie, an exotic plant she'd bought online. She wanted it to be the perfect gift, but apparently the other attendees showered my sister in expensive silverware and paperweights. Still, Rosie is obsessed with plants, so it was the perfect housewarming gift. I didn't realize the severity of my sister's infatuation until I was standing on her doorstep, face to face with an overgrown lily, its leaves spiking me in the forehead. There was no flower garden. The house was too small. Instead, someone had planted flowers between the cracks in the concrete path leading to the door. I almost felt bad for stepping on them. When I reached the door, I noticed vines creeping through the frame and snaking up the walls. I knocked, swallowing my nerves. Rosie had 3 roommates, all of who were still college friends I had never met. I had, however, heard enough about them to feel like I knew them better than they knew themselves. Ever since we were kids, Rosie had attached herself to various obsessions, becoming hyperfixated with TV shows, actors, singers, plants, and now her friends. Every time she came for dinner, it was never about how she was or her life. Rosie talked about her friends with a sparkle in her eye, her smile broadening every time she mentioned them, which made me wonder if the 4 of them were, in fact, more than friends. When the door swung open, I was hit in the face with an overpowering scent. Too strong. Too intoxicating. It bled into my nostrils, clinging to the back of my throat, almost choking me. Somehow, though, it pulled me in, teasing me to take a deep inhale, allowing each aroma to fill my lungs, suffocating me further. The guy who peeked through the narrow gap looked closer to my age, mid-20s. His sandy-colored hair was a shoddy mess, as if he'd run his fingers through it too many times, with noticeably greasy, wayward strands entangled with daisies. I found myself entranced by each individual flower sitting comfortably on the crown of his head. His smile was crooked and knowing, one eyebrow raised, almost like he was expecting me. I thought my sister was exaggerating when she described him as having plant boy energy, but I had to agree. Though not for the reasons you might think. Yes, he was wearing a flower crown, and I was starting to think that this was where my sister's infatuation had stemmed from. But this guy was filthy. His short-sleeved tee was no longer white, no longer any color at all, just a smear of dirt ingrained in the fabric, clinging to his visibly clammy skin. I don't think he had showered in weeks, maybe even months. When he swatted a fly buzzing around his head, I found myself staring at his feet. He was barefoot, dirt caked between his toenails. He looked almost high, his pupils visibly dilated as he swayed back and forth, swinging on the door. High on that smell, maybe? High enough to forget basic hygiene? I found my voice, my own hands growing slick with sweat. "Hi," I said, trying not to stare at his feet. "I'm Posey." The guy's smile widened, his voice smooth, almost melodic, which only strengthened my theory that my sister and her roommates were unknowingly getting high off that smell. I didn't think he'd know me by my childhood nickname, yet he cocked his head slowly, as if I were a puzzle he was struggling to solve. I can't fully explain it, but this man did not like me. His smile was friendly enough, but it felt patronizing, as though he were being forced to talk to me. He was giving off high school mean girl vibes, his lips prickling into a smile, his eyes raking me up and down like he wasn't covered in dirt. He was laughing at me, squeezing his lips together to try and hide it, and painfully failing. "You're Rosie's older sister." "Poppy," I corrected him. His smile didn't waver. "Interesting choice of name." "I didn't choose it," I quit back. "Can I talk to my sister?" He shrugged. "She's not available right now." I nodded patiently. though this guy was slowly getting on my nerves. His gaze never faltered, like he was drinking all of me in with just a single glance. "Can I come in?" "It's Kaz." I didn't ask. His lips curved into a smirk. It's common courtesy. "Can I just see my sister?" I swallowed a yell. "Please?" He rolled his eyes, exaggerating a sigh. "Ugh, but then I'd have to climb up the stairs." I could sense my smile thinning. "You're in your mid-20s. He shrugged. "Exactly, halfway to 30. "Can I see my sister?" "She's tied up with something." "Okay then, can I come in and see her myself?" His smile didn't waver. "We have a lot of plants." "I know. You might get overwhelmed." "I'm fine," I said. "I can deal with a few flowers." Something in his expression twitched suddenly, the quirk of a genuine smile. Whatever face he was wearing on top of his face began to splinter, making way to the boy underneath, whose expression brightened at the mere mention of flowers. "Do you like flowers?" When I didn't respond, he straightened up, mockingly bowing and gesturing me through. "Come on in, but don't say I didn't warn you." He winked, settling me with that infuriating smile. When I hesitated, he danced back inside and down the hallway. I followed, transfixed by the amount of plants. When the door slammed shut behind me, I jumped, but Kaz just laughed, commenting about a faulty hinge. I could sense his gaze following me, immediately triumphant. He was right. I was immediately overwhelmed by the sheer amount of green in my face, leaves tangling with my hair and prickling my bare arms. When I had to push through overgrown leaves to follow Kaz, tripping over flowering buds growing through cracks in flooring, I knew my sister and her equally insane roommate were at the point of no return. This house was more suited to plants than humans. I took slow steps, drinking in every flower, every mini tree, mushroom, everything that she could grow, she had. My sister had turned their hallway into a mini rainforest. I caught a spider scuttling across my arm and brushed it off. The further I delved into the house, the more obvious it became that my sister's plant obsession was going a little too far. Kaz, unfazed by the dirt caked into the carpet and spider webs clinging to every wall, coaxed me into what I guessed was a kitchen. But there was far too much green, entangled vines and leaves hanging from the ceiling and sticking from the walls, to prepare food. There was a refrigerator and an oven, but like everything else, they were caked in dirt. I was half aware that I was standing under a giant sunflower growing from the ceiling. Under my feet, what was left of the kitchen tiles had been removed to fill with fresh soil. Kaz gave me a small tour, and somehow it got worse. The upstairs was out of bounds apparently, but I did see the stairs, and that was enough. Whatever was growing on the floor was spreading, tangled through every piece of furniture, every splash of paintwork, and eventually had found the ceiling, spiderwebbing into the kitchen and beyond. Kaz was a fairly decent tour guide, though he did stop at every single plant, perfectly naming it and telling me of its origins. He led me into a lounge area that was again suffocated by plants. I was pretty sure these kids had planted grass inside their living room to accommodate a variety of strangely colored flowers blooming from every corner. There was a semblance of a living space, with a shabby couch in front of a TV screen gathering dust. I glimpsed a girl in yellow knelt in front of the window, bathing in the rich afternoon sunlight, her head tipped back, eyes closed, dark brown curls tangled with roses flowing down the curve of her spine. The bright yellow was her dress, a discolored curtain sculpted to an almost skeletal figure. She was beautiful, and yet her beauty didn't slide into the usual standards. When she slightly turned her head, presumably to drink in the sunlight, letting it caress every inch of her face, I noticed her angular nose and crooked teeth. Somehow, though, she fit perfectly inside this room as one of the flowers. Looking closer, something twisted in my gut. She was in the same state as Kaz. Her hair was in a matted, entangled disarray. I could tell she hadn't showered in a while, stewing in the exact same dress, which almost framed her, bleeding into her, binding itself to her skin. Kaz. Her voice was a sigh, and I detected the soft cadence of a British accent. The girl's eyes flickered, her lips pricking into a smile. She shook her head, enjoying streaks of sunlight pricking her cheeks. This girl was drinking it greedily, giggling to herself. Darling, didn't I tell you to stop picking up strays? I noticed several flies buzzing around her, creeping across her face and slipping through her lips, but she wasn't fazed, her smile only growing wider. Kaz, who was leaning against the wall, his arms folded, rolled his eyes. That's Violet, commonly here getting her daily fix. He shot me a smile. That again was real. I think being around flowers made this guy happy. He looked like he was glowing, bleeding in the late afternoon rays, carving a shadow against his face. It's a house tradition that we gather here every morning and soak up the early sunrise. I didn't know what to say, except, cool. I think the two were expecting me to join them, especially when Kaz stepped forward, closer to the window and into direct sunlight. I watched the way his head tipped back, slowly, eyes closing, like he was reveling in it, letting it drown him, bleeding into his bones. I could see every inhale, and each one looked and sounded peaceful, like every breath was being gently pulled from his lungs. I don't know why, but part of me wanted to join in with whatever this was. It made them happy, it calmed them, dragging them from the mundanity of their lives and into the light. I found myself smiling, my gaze enraptured by the two roommates, just vibing, before I caught myself. These two were filthy. Their house was a health hazard, and I was pretty sure they were high on a combination of sunlight and a constant stream of smells, choking both logical thought and burning enough brain cells to stop them acting like actual people. I think I was falling for it too, already intoxicated by the stink. But my body, however, knew something was wrong. A slither of panic entwining its way through me, hitting every nerve ending. Kaz, I found my voice when he led me outside. Huh? He proudly showed me his favorite, a purplish rose he cupped in his hands. I didn't have the heart to say, this is freaking weird. Rosie's roommates had a greenhouse in their tiny backyard. It wasn't surprising, but their whole house was a greenhouse. Suddenly, my sister was an afterthought when Kaz led me through the copious amounts of the exact same plant. He was comfortable in the dirt, his feet squishing through the soil, as he danced from plant to plant, watering each one with the perfect precision, like they were his own children. When Kaz was finished tending to each stem, he picked up the hose and sprayed himself, gulping directly from the nozzle. Kaz tossed me the hose, still sputtering water. Want some? He swiped his mouth. It's fresh. This kid was in love with flowers, in love with his lifestyle. In doing so, he had somehow forgotten that he was human. Rosie was freaking insane for living in these conditions, and I was getting her out. Where's your bathroom? I asked, feigning a smile. I was already backing away. Kaz didn't seem to notice, knelt in front of a patch of dirt. He was using his hands to dig a fresh hole for what I guessed was a new plant. I watched his fingers rake through the dirt, something slimy slithering its way up my throat. Bathroom is upstairs on your left, he responded in a low hum. I didn't wait for him to confirm which door or room. I was already stumbling back into the house. Violet was still sunbathing when I peeked inside the lounge, but this time she had taken off her shirt, and I swore something was growing from her left breast. I could see it tangled around her, creeping down towards her stomach. I was already running up the stairs, my sister's name choked in the back of my throat. Rosie? I clawed for my phone, and it slipped through my trembling hands. Rosie! Taking slow strides down the hallway, I found myself pushing through tangled vines and flowers physically blocking the bathroom door. There were 6 rooms on the second floor, 2 of which were completely blocked, suffocated by greenery. When I managed to shove the bathroom door open, I stepped straight into branches whipping my face and tearing at my hair. The bathroom, surprisingly, was the most normal room in the house. Apart from the large flowering buds, almost the size of me, crawling up and down the tiles, I could still see a bathtub and toilet, both of which were filled with dirt. I had no doubt they were being used as makeshift plant pots. Something moved on the wall. One of the pink flower buds twitched. I started forward, tripping over tangled vines poking from the bathroom floor. No, not vines. Something inside me snapped, coming apart, and I felt myself straighten up, my hands slowly creeping toward my mouth. I knew what it was before it fully registered. My body well ahead of my brain. I was half aware of a scream clawing in my throat, my palms suffocating my mouth. The body at my feet was wrapped in a silk-like lining, almost like a cocoon, but I could just make out thick, sandy hair sprouting from a decomposing skull. His legs curled into him, almost resembling a fetus. I dropped to my knees beside him, his name muffled against my palm. Kaz. I wanted to believe he was alive, wanted to believe he was okay, but when I made the mistake of rolling him onto his back, I immediately threw up, choking on vomit, trying to squeeze its way up my throat. Kaz was a psychopath's depiction of beauty. His eyes had been plucked out, twin dandelions in their place, skeletal teeth tangled in vines, as if someone had spent hours, days even, transforming his corpse into their masterpiece. His organs had been carved out perfectly, as if by a surgeon's hand, and each one was replaced by blooming flowers. Kaz's heart, or what was left of it, was a beautiful blooming rose, while its stem entwined through his ribcage, flowering all the way down to the gouge where his intestines should have been. The worst part was, even without eyes or a soul, somehow this boy was still smiling. When I tried to kick him onto his front as a mark of respect, I realized his body, his whole being, was cruelly bound to the tiles. My only thought then was to get out of there, because if my sister's roommate was dead in front of me, who the hell let me inside their house? I was pulling the door open, my body running on adrenaline, when the twitching and expanding bud on the wall moved again. This time I stumbled forward, glimpsing a human face sprouting through the writhing petals. 2 human faces. The first was a guy, who I guessed was the third unnamed roommate. The flowering bud tried to spit him out, but he was undigested flesh, cocooned in a sticky white substance. This guy was my age, dark brown hair and traces of laugh lines, stabling him as the joker of the group. I thought he was mostly intact, just unconscious, until my gaze traveled down, finding his hollowed out stomach, which, just like Kaz's, was filled with blooming flowers. The second human face came through quickly, slick with that same substance. The thing that was holding her, holding the unnamed boy, was alive, twitching and swaying side to side, almost like it was freaking teasing me, challenging me to pull my sister's mutilated corpse free. I already knew her dark blonde curls tied into that stupid ponytail, the butterfly tattoo on her cheek she got only last year. Rosie. My sister's eyes were closed, tiny pink flowers wrapped around her pupils. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't stop. I already knew she was dead. Her cheeks were gray and drained of color, a vicious, merciless green tinge creeping across her face and tangled in her blood. I could see where it had spread, like a virus, stretching up her neck and sprouting across her face. But somehow my eyes defied me, dropping down to her bulging, pregnant stomach, which unlike her, was still alive. Something drove me forward, and when it sensed movement, entwined green vines wrapped around my sister's stomach, as if protecting whatever was inside. But my sister couldn't get pregnant. When she was younger, Rosie had severe period pain to the point of ending up in the emergency room. She had her womb removed, so she could never have children. I found myself transfixed by the writhing thing stretching my sister's stomach. So how was Rosie pregnant? My gaze flicked to the unnamed roommate, and then Kaz. Both of them had been hollowed out and filled with flowers, which meant my sister wasn't its only attempt. This thing just needed a body, and Rosie was its success. In one swift movement, I was at the door, my hands clamped around the handle. Posey? Kaz's voice sent me twisting around, my heart in my throat. Whatever this thing was, it was perfectly mimicking the dead boy. A dead boy I had never really known. When he cocked his head, a single pink flower bloomed from his right eye, taking it over. His skin moved, writhing like something was there, tangled in every mimicked bone. I could see this thing coming alive, not just inside Kaz, but all around us, in rustling leaves, in the buds holding my sister and the unnamed roommate. It sounded like they were laughing. When Kaz opened his mouth, blood-stained petals slipped through his lips, and I broke apart, both in body and mind. I threw myself past him, and when he grabbed for me, his slimy, inhuman fingers wrapping around me, I slammed his head into the floor. Once. He screeched like an animal. Twice. Blood-stained slime erupted from his mouth and nose. An inhuman cry rattled from not just his mouth, but all around us. Violet's scream fell in symphony downstairs. The thing holding my sister echoed its cry, and Rosie dropped onto the floor. A sudden, harmonious wail slammed into me, so powerful I had to bury my head in my knees. Kaz dropped to his knees, conscious but in visible pain. There was a brief moment when his hands came up, clawing at the greenery sprouting from his skull, before they fell limp. I hate that I didn't drag Rosie out with me, but she was dead, and I couldn't do that to myself. I didn't stop, didn't falter, forcing myself to keep running until I was halfway down the street, screaming into my hands. I went home, and for the next few days, I stayed silent. I showered, scrubbing myself until my skin was raw, until my thoughts were hazy. 2 days ago, I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, pulling half of a tangled rose from my spine, where the thorns pricked through my skin. I went to the bathroom at work and found myself staring at tiny buds growing on my chest. I broke and told Mom. I told her everything, showing her what was growing on me. I plucked each tangled root from my fingernail, dropping them in front of her. "Rosie is dead," I shrieked, my voice trembling. Mom didn't speak for a moment, her fingers nursing her coffee. Then she reached across the table and pulled out a petal clinging to my hair. "That young man was a bad influence," she finally said. "When I first visited them, these children were adults, and yet they made stupid decisions." Mom sighed, sipping her coffee. "Kaz and your sister argued a lot, while the other two," she scoffed. "Violet, a former pregnant teenager, and Nate, who went to juvie." Mom's smile grew whimsical, playing with my hair. "There are good things growing in that house," Mom said. "Good people, Posey." I left before she could finish her sentence, grabbing my bag and getting out of there. I can still hear her words in my head, and even here, where I know she won't find me. I can feel her eyes boring into me. I'm so scared she's coming to get me. I can still see her, staring, almost longingly at the flowers growing from my skin, waiting. Besides, my mother's voice was a chuckle, and I swore I could see tiny pricks of green tangled under her fingernails. I'm going to be a grandma. Alright, has anyone ever seen or played the game The Last of Us? Because those are the vibes I'm getting right now. Except it's not the spores of some creepy mushroom. It's, the succulent that's in your living room. And the fake Kaz that answered the door didn't really want to let her into the house. So maybe the OP should have just listened and been like, alright, yeah, she's busy. I'll come back next time when she's not being turned into a plant. Anyways, shout out Trash Tia for serving up another banger like always. Once again, reading another Trash Tia story, and I've never read one that's bad. They're all so good. Anyways, that's all the scary Reddit stories in Minecraft I have for you today. We had some pretty good ones today. Shout out to my channel members. Thank you so much for your support on the channel. It is greatly appreciated. And if you guys do want to further support the channel, that link's in the description. However, it is not at all required, completely optional. If you did enjoy this video, don't forget to hit like and subscribe, as it does help me out greatly. And with all that said, I will see you guys tomorrow. Thanks for watching. Peace. 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 Peace.